Hello, boss listeners. Today we're bringing you something a little different. A first in what we hope will become a regular addition to the podcasts. And that's an interview with an author of a book of some substance. An interview on the issue of influence, the separation of self from that influence, the influence reading has on writing, on authorial voice, its nature and how one crafts it, and just in general how one writes. On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Chaya Bhuvaneswar. Near the end of last year, Chaya released her first book, a collection of intelligently and emotionally crafted short stories titled White Dancing Elephants. These stories are rather dark in nature. They tend to focus on diverse women of color and the sort of trials and difficulties that surround being a woman of color in today's society throughout the world, and specifically with a focus on sort of South Asian identity. The stories are really great. I highly recommend them. There's this sort of undercurrent of anger and darkness, and yet they're well crafted and emotionally gripping. Now, I spoke with Chaya via telephone, so the audio quality might be a little low, but it's definitely worth a listen. And as I said, I hope we have more of these coming in the next few months. So give it a listen and enjoy. Thank you. So I think the first question I'd like to ask you is, do you believe that it's possible to even separate yourself from your influences? If you don't, do you embrace that idea at all?
That's a wonderful question. I mean, I think, I guess the way I look at that is, for me, it's important to separate myself from potential influences only insofar as I want to make sure that I do everything I can to let my voice come out. And I know it sounds very weird, but I guess I kind of feel like that voice actually exists separate from me. And, you know, it's that sensation writers often get where you read something you wrote 10 years ago and you're like, oh shit, you know, like, what was that? You know, like you're taken by surprise by things that come out, or that certainly I'm often taken by surprise by things that my characters say. I'm like, whoa. And I think that a lot of it really does feel like get out of the way, kind of get out of your own way kind of thing. And so I think I did go through a phase in my writing. I distinctly remember it. I think it was when I read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Namesake for the first time, and I had this odd feeling of shame that, will my writing ever have that kind of propriety or restraint, and look at all these dirty things I'm writing about, and it's not refined. And, you know, I had shame, and then I really, that helped me understand that that's not why we write, or why any kind of gift has been given to us, and that's the whole point. I mean, that shame is one of the most interesting writing prompts, you know, like what can, you know, I trying to remember who said this to me. I think it might have been Maggie Smith, the poet, and also, some other poets as well, but, you know, in general, saying we're writing about things we can't forget about. You know, we're writing about events, memories, people, relationships that evoke emotions as visceral and involuntary as shame, and that gives the writing life. And I remember this great description by Jennifer Egan of how she moved from just sort of writing, like she said, she produced her first novel, or, you know, something very early, sent it around, and then realized it was probably a sign of something that no one would return her call. She sent it to people. Suddenly people went missing. Versus going to this writing class and eventually bringing the story in and feeling like she had an animal in her bag, like there was something alive, and that indeed was the first story that the writing teacher read out loud. That was the mark of, I recognize this. I think we all have that sort of point, like my wonderful colleague Nana Kwame Ajebrenya was talking about how, there was one summer and he worked really hard and he brought in the story that he thought, it was going to be amazing, and then people said it was horrible, but then the ending was pristine. And he kind of hung on to that idea, the ending, it's pristine. So I think that when we do find the voices really come out in a realized and spontaneous way, it's so euphoria-inducing because it moves us beyond that constant second-guessing and self-loathing that seems inherent to writing, where you read it and you're like, this is so stupid, or you read it and you think, who is going to care about this? And then it just moves into a different place where you feel humbled and you feel commanded and you feel kind of like, this is a person. This person has the right to be seen and the right to be heard. And I'm sure I'm not putting it exactly as I mean it, because it's hard for me to put into words that mystery. So I do think it's important to kind of separate out to the point where I'm making sure I'm not avoiding myself in trying to be like someone else, or I'm not fleeing from the shame in trying to over-polish or over-refine, but rather I'm walking deep into the thicket of the shame.
Okay.
I'm deep into it. I'm right there and saying, wow, what's this? There's something pulsing and horrifying and potentially really scary, and instead of walking around it or walking away from it, I go right up to it, I sit down and I touch it, and I see what it has to say to me. You know? So I think it is important to separate yourself from influences to that extent, to really create a space where where you really get to the point of good or bad. This is what I have to say, good or bad.
Based on your stories in this collection, White Dancing Elephants, it certainly seems like you have no problem steering into those dark places. And shame is a word you mentioned a lot. So I imagine when you were writing it, did you embrace that sort of desire to go into those places?
I think it's a gift to really genuinely not know if you're going to be published when you're writing. I really do think that's a gift. Almost everyone I've talked to says with great nostalgia, oh yes, the first. Like Randall Kennan said that to me at Sewanee. He said, you'll never get to do your first again, with a lot of nostalgia, because there is a way you are writing you are already in a dark, secret place when you're writing, and you're really writing just to have that voice heard, even by you. And so you don't really know who else is reading over your shoulder. And that's very special, and I think that's very empowering. And so for me, I remember, too, these moments. Like, I remember maybe 10 years ago, I was writing something, and I think it might have been a really early version of Tolinda, like just that she existed as a character at all.
Okay.
And then I remember putting it aside, and I think a lot of the putting aside of stories does come from that early shame of feeling too revealed. Or I remember having conversations with friends and saying, what if my boss reads this? Or, and having people sort of laugh at it. But it's quite a journey to reach the point where you sort of understand that actually what makes you strong and effective in other parts of your life, in my case, including hopefully to be therapeutic as a doctor, comes out of this same truthful place. Really comes out of a sense of integrity and a sense of fidelity to the truth, and a sense of not ever trying to just sort of gloss over or take an easier way, but to really, really try to face things. But then at the same time do that with some amount of compassion, because I love all the characters in my book, including the ones who, especially including the ones who are dreadful. dreadful. What they're doing is so wrong, but I really love them. So.
Interesting. So you mentioned you've been writing for quite a while. What was the path, I guess, for finding your voice or allowing this voice to kind of come through you, as you described it, almost classically, like calling upon a muse almost? Did you purposely try to find something?
No, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, so the evolution that I think about now, and I feel like understand better now, is that really in the first grade, so I started reading at 3, and then by the first grade, I was putting together my mini narratives, my little books, and I knew I was a writer, and I knew I would be a writer, and it was something that I always completely took for granted, that of course I'm going to write, of course I'm a writer, and I would, the only way that it sort of came out is that I would write these really polished, complete seeming essays, and I would do games, like I would wait till an hour before the deadline, and then I would just do it, and then I would hand it in, and I would laugh to myself. It was ridiculous. So it was this kind of thing where I was like, I can do this. I can just do this. I'm going to just take it for granted. What else can I do? What else should I do? I'll never make money off it. That seemed incredibly implausible. But I knew I could do it. And then something changed. Something definitely changed in 9th grade, because we had this teacher, Tom Fagelson. If you're listening to this, you are that teacher. And he was very sweet, and he actually was really trying to be more culturally diverse, culturally progressive. And so he actually was the first teacher who introduced us to Asian American literature and writing by people of color in a very respectful, truly craft-oriented way. And so in his class, for the first time, I read The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. And then I understood that it was this paradox of, on the one hand, yeah, of course I'm a writer. Writing is what I do, versus how will I ever be a writer? like this sense of, yes, I am in this group of people for whom writing is instinctive, necessary, and natural. But how do you get from there to writing something that is really good? And that was because I thought The Woman Warrior, look how it stands up. X number of decades later, it really stands up. It really stands up. It is just a remarkable work, and it's so ahead of its time in terms of being cross-genre of myth, legend, fiction, nonfiction, right? I mean, it's really, really good. And so I read that, and then I started doing these talk story exercises, and then I realized part of what made getting from here to there so difficult was grappling with the emotional weight of what my voice wanted to say and what I wanted to write about. So Maxine Hong Kingston talks about grappling with the girlhood among ghosts and secrets, and the dilemma of, on the one hand, the most powerful things she wants to write about are also the ones that she is under the most pressure not to speak of publicly. Never speak of this outside the family, So I think that that, for me, that was really a turning point, and everything sort of has been a push and pull since then. Like, on the one hand, I used writing to get scholarships, to go to college, to get into college, to win a Rhodes Scholarship, to win lots of other things. Writing and winning sort of became very entwined. On the other hand, Lauren Groff has such a lovely way of describing it, and I'm so grateful to her for her support of this book and blurbing it and so on. She has this way of saying, writing will give you back what you put into it. Like, if you're not loyal to it, it's not going to give you what you want, And so I think that was really right, that I probably was writing something along the way at all points. And remember, the week before leaving for medical school, I was in tears as I was putting these stories into envelopes and to literary journals and crying, and then I got one of my first acceptances then, but I mean, I think it's a lot to dismantle being first generation American and coming from a pretty humble background in many ways, and I think it takes a lot of dismantling of expectations and goals that sort of get internalized of like what is a viable life, what is a life that I can respect, to get to the point where you sort of face your relationship to writing and say, well, actually this can help me do so many other things just by not absorbing the energy of fighting this anymore, so sort of, but I think like, I feel like I have friends on both sides of the equation of leap and take a chance and just go for it and don't worry. So Laura Vandenberg, such a wonderful writer, also blurbed and read with me at Harvard Bookstore, but, her dad was a famous journalist, and she had a pattern. She had something to follow there, versus many other people, like I'm thinking Viet Thanh Nguyen, who, he made himself be an academic and get a PhD and write books, and he was the first in his family to get anywhere near that level of American education and established. And then only once he had done all that did he then take a year sabbatical, write a book, write the book he wanted to write in fiction, and then everything has gone from there. And he's found a wonderful integration. So I'm still hoping for that. Like maybe there'll be more integration. Definitely love mentoring people who want to combine writing with medicine or other careers, and really, really enjoy supporting people who are trying to juggle these different things. There's definitely no right answer. There's definitely no single answer, But I just think that it takes a level of confidence that there's some safety net that will catch you if you really have nothing, that I can't imagine having had. Like, I can't imagine actually believing that. Like, if I don't have a solid, reliable, predictable way of making a living, somehow the system will catch me or someone will catch me. There was no one to catch me. There was just no one to catch me. Like, the most would be, well, why don't you just get married and then get your spouse to support you that way? But I could never see that as reliable enough, What if your spouse has an accident? What if you need to be the one supporting your spouse, right? I mean, it's a two-way thing. But anyway.
So when we first exchanged emails, I was asking you for a list of some books that had some sort of impact or influence on you. And the one book that you that you selected that either had the most or maybe the most relevant to your own collection, we'll talk about that, is Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Yes.
What made you select that book? What connection do you have to that work, and how has it influenced your own work or made you perceive writing differently or reading? Or
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, the timing of it, I remember reading it when I think it was before I started pulling together the stories, and then reading it again right after my book came out, and just feeling a sense of benign, admiring kind of permission giving from this book, because Janet Maslin did not like the book, right? I think there were some critics who were quite savage about the blog, and that's the thing, a blog really examining blackness and the experience of blackness and the experience of different kinds of oppression and violence and survivorship of violence. And I felt like it was coming from a place of such emotional depth and immediacy, and I felt so inspired by that. At the same time, there was this huge tenderness of the narrative of the male character, the one who goes away to get educated away and comes back and has to, has this duality of not necessarily wanting to treat the servants a certain way or be a certain kind of boss guy, but being pushed into this role. And I thought too it was also very brave in showing eroticism in a community of people of color in an unvarnished way and with a lot of humor, and was just really like the whole idea of sealing and why she calls him that, and I just really liked I liked the humor of it as well. But I think the act of writing her anger and not pandering, I think that was the biggest reason why I felt it was such an influence. You feel reading that book that she panders to no one.
And I think a lot of those words can be describing your own work, or at least as a reader, I see immediacy is very, very much a part of your collection, as well as pain and isolation, and anger is a word you mentioned. I hope I'm not misspeaking, but it certainly felt there's this current of anger in a lot of your narratives.
Sure. Thank you for it.
But in a way that really, I think, connects to a reader on a very visceral level. It's such a powerful emotion to hook a reader into and really empathize more than any other emotion. I think anger is a very powerful way to bring a reader in, and then you can go into different places through that. But it certainly seems to be there.
I thank you for that, because as I think about it, I mean, one of the things that really interests me about anger is how we find ourselves in it often. We don't choose it. We don't try to induce it or bring it on. It's a state of sort of less control, and yet and yet there are things that can teach us about ourselves, and also we can feel it but not necessarily enact it on someone else. I mean, like there's this story, one of the stories, the goddess of beauty goes bowling, and I guess I really felt that, that the angry father, the father who's so full of not just anger but grief, intense grief, and missing the son that he's not able to be with, and kind of stuck with his daughter who has special needs, and that he never would have wanted to be the caregiver for, but he's in this position. He still has a choice about how he's going to manifest that anger. I mean, we all have choices about how we vent that anger, how we manifest it, how we channel it. And that's what I think is so interesting about it, that even though anger comes upon us and it is a powerful, perhaps universal emotion, it allows us choices.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thing. And it's not that all it's not that all physically nonviolent choices are necessarily good choices, because I think the other thing that I'm always struck by is how much emotional violence is possible by someone who's really angry.
Yes.
Like without laying a hand on anyone. Like how terrible they can be. So.
And I guess my final question here, you've mentioned a lot of different works and a lot of different authors, and you referenced your own history as a writer. Do you think of yourself as a writer or a reader first? Are they inseparable?
It's such a good question to remind us of our of our work as writers, which I feel like I'm very imperfect at it. So I feel like I am always really behind in my reading of things that I'm looking forward to reading more of. Like one example being the novel No One Can Pronounce My Name, which has been longlisted for the Dublin Impact Award and is by friend and colleague Rakesh Satyal. I'm supposed to interview him. I'm delaying interviewing him because I still have like 30 pages to finish. Like these things. Or like Karen Carlson Lee is a wonderful poet. Do I have his book? Yes. Am I supposed to review that book? Yes. Have I done it? No. So I feel like reading is, like Lauren Groff also said recently in a Boston Globe interview, it's my job, and she estimates reading 300 books a year, and all of this. And I don't even know what number of books I read because I dip into books I kind of know. Like I probably read tracks. I reread parts of tracks every couple of months. Or I'll reread parts of Washington Square, other Henry James, lots of Shakespeare, Ovid. I mean, I feel like I'm really good at sort of random, intense reading of parts of things. But I think it is a constant activity, and yet one of my goals for this year is to actually read in a little more of a coherent way of giving books the space that they deserve in my waking life and designating time for them. Because it's really a time issue. It's really like where do you get that afternoon to sit and read a book? And I have young kids and I work full time, so it is going to be in snippets for a while, but I suspect it's not always going to be like that. Okay. So, but I do think that act of reading and keeping our senses and our sensibility alive to what a writer is doing, what someone is trying to do, I do think that's incredibly important. We went away a little bit on vacation last week, but even there, somehow there were a couple hours where I reread Jippa Lahiri's second collection of stories, Not Interpreter, but Unaccustomed Earth, and really enjoyed it. And then read Soma Sharif's beautiful NBA long-listed poetry collection, Look, which is just incredible, and I recommend it to everyone. So, I mean, I think you can't really write unless you read, but I think increasingly now, as I've gone on a book tour and met amazing booksellers and met people for whom buying a book, including somehow my book, which just blows me away, is it's a treat for them. It's like an activity. It's something about which they're connoisseurs. The whole concept of book culture, I think it's huge, and I want to now designate a couple hours a week where I'm actually allowed to sit and drink tea or something and read without trying to do 10 million other things at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that would be, I think that will make the brain cells that I have left after a lot of sleep deprivation last a lot longer. I really do.
I think that's the reader's dilemma in a nutshell right there. It's just finding that time and that peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are you working on next? Are you writing more short stories? Are you working on a novel?
So things have kind of coalesced, and I'm really grateful for that. Really grateful that my agent at Evita is supportive and friends are supportive. So I've kind of, there are 4 projects that at least 2 of them will go out on sub this year, so that's kind of exciting. One is a novel that is done at least, up-teamed draft kind of thing, and we're thinking that can probably go out this year. There's a second novel that's a lot farther away from being done, and then there's an essay collection, some of which has already been published in Long Reads and Tin House Online. And then finally there's a linked story collection about an interracial marriage kind of before and through the age of Trump, and sort of how these 2 people come together in certain ways and are so separate in other ways. The husband is a a sort of geologist, eco activist who's involved in an Everglades restoration project, and the wife is a South Asian American woman who's a physician and going through training and going through lots of other things. So that the parts of that have appeared in Narrative Magazine and Joyland, and there are a couple more stories of that to write, but not a lot. But it's always the challenge is how to then make it cohere. A Visit from the Goon Squad is such a beautiful example of linked stories that really felt like the more than the sum of their parts kind of thing. And so, linked stories. And then, so those four things, the two novels, one set of linked stories, and one essay collection is sort of what I've got. And, it represents many years of not sending anything out. Sort of like, you figure, then you finally realize, well, that's why they're not getting published. That there could be other reasons too, but the number one reason is no one's seeing them. You start, then you're like, oh, maybe I should, But I'm very grateful because a lot of people, including readers, but also editors and different people, have encouraged me very strongly to submit these other works, and so I feel like now it's on me to make sure I do that in the best way, where they're really truly crafted, but then also responsive to this idea that someone is actually waiting to read them, which is an amazing gift.
Yeah,
that's an amazing gift. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, thank you, David. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that episode. We will have more interviews with authors coming every couple of months, in between our usual discussions of books of some substance. As always, check us out online at booksofsomesubstance.com. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at booksofsubstance. Until next time, peace.